Well, that's like, so that's 18,000. The second place player has 6,900, which is still a fuckload.
That's a lot too. Yeah.
But is a third.
This reminds me of how like when it was revealed that like 1/3 of Wikipedia was written by one guy.
Oh yeah.
Butterscotch
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 499 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is December 20th, 22x4. And before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your recurring donations to help keep the podcast going. So this is our last episode of the year, which means it's time to look back in time across the space-time fabric and figure out what the fuck happened.
What even? Yeah.
It's been a wild year. So we have some stats that we want to go through of just like by the numbers, some stuff that we could actually measure, sort of, in the studio. And then we'll just kind of talk about, at a high level, what we've managed to pull off and what it's kind of been like to work on Crashlands 2 this year. And then if we got time, we'll get into some questions.
Yeah.
So,
Will we? Probably not, but we'll do what we can.
Yeah.
So if you're
stats, Adam.
Yeah, if you're a subscriber to the Butterscotch Ballyhoo, which is our newsletter, then you'll have already gotten these in your inbox by the time you hear this, probably. Actually, hold on. Yep, definitely. If you're a subscriber, and if you want to see more of this kind of stuff, anyway, make sure you also subscribe to that thing. So you can just go to bscotch.net and track it down there. But anyway, so this year I wanted to look back and do a little Bscotch Wrapped to figure out how do we represent a whole last year of work with some numbers, the way that Spotify tries to do. They've got an easier problem because what does everybody do on Spotify? Listening to music. Well, exactly one kind of thing. How do you measure it? How much time they spent doing it.
Easy
one
peasy.
fucking thing. So easy. I was trying to figure out how to summarize the work of a team of 9 building a video game, So it's limited to the stuff that is, in some sense, measurable. But the numbers are pretty fun and interesting. So here's what we got. We added 700 new art assets to the game.
Jeez.
So that's between Sam and our new artist, Anne. 700 new things. Now, a piece of art, though, isn't just an art asset is not one picture, right? An art asset can consist of multiple frames. It can be an animation. It can be a skeletonized monstrosity that is animated and can do stuff, right? So
some of them take a week to put together. Some of them take
10 minutes or whatever. Yeah.
An hour, but 700
is a lot, no matter how long it takes,
Yeah.
And so, but collectively, those consist of 2,200 parts, as in like individual art pieces that come together to make up those 700 art assets. So that's a lot of things. That's a lot.
I'll say that's actually still going to be an undersell, right? Because that's probably just measuring the sub images of sprites
and the bones of.
Did you get the attachments for the exports?
Attachments for spine sprites.
Okay, so that'll be accurate. Pretty accurate.
Okay, pretty close.
Yeah, I tallied it all up.
Couple thousand.
So that's a lot, and that's between 2 artists, right? So then we also added 80,000 words to the game.
Jeez.
Which is more words than the first game had.
Yes. I believe there are like 5,000 more since I put those stats together. I assume there's also a dozen new art assets since I put these stats together because that was a whole week ago. So,
Yeah, you're behind.
So 80,000 words, and that's between everything, the quest item descriptions, quests, blah, just all of it. And so the total word count now for the game is 130,000. So
Jeez.
that's a lot. If you ever do National Novel Writing Month, 50,000 words is the sort of like short novel goal. Longer than a novella, shorter than like your typical novel, but it's a good round number that's like, yeah, that's basically a whole ass book, right? So we're in the territory of having almost 3 of those currently.
It's funny. I was talking with Jen, our writer, about this a while back, and she was like, it sounds like a lot of words, but what you don't realize is that in a novel, a lot of the words are used to also describe the scene and the action and like the things that are happening.
Yeah.
But in a game, that's what the art is doing, and that's what the gameplay is doing.
Yeah.
So most of that dialogue is literally just the words part of the novel, the dialogue of the novel. And not the rest, which makes it even more impressive.
Because it's just
how
dialogue.
much there is.
Yeah. So it's a lot. And on top of that, we are translating it, right? So 100,000 words of that so far have been translated by external team consisting of dozens of people, because it's basically 2 people translating, 1 person reviewing the translation, all of whom are fluent in the target language, plus a project manager in charge of the whole thing, and then, various other parties involved.
Basically just a small army doing translation.
Just a small army doing translation stuff. Which
unfortunately means it ain't cheap.
It's not cheap. It is not fast. And it's extremely hard to do the work to produce the words in the first place. As we're saying, what we're putting together, what Jen's putting together, is basically the dialogue, right? And to figure out where the dialogue's going, but it's for a branching, complex narrative, right? That some parts can be shut off in a given moment. It depends on where you are in the game, but you're not seeing that while you're doing it. So you're trying to like reconstruct where everything is, where things take place, and so on. But if you make all of it, then at least you have that. At least you have that part in your brain of like, okay, I know what's going on when I say the phrase beep boop over here. I know that's referring to this misnamed character from this other scene, 1,000 words ago. It's something that wasn't a quest dialogue, but was this other thing or whatever, right?
Poor translators.
And they just got spreadsheets.
They just got spreadsheets, and they're trying to figure out how to piece this together. And I'm trying to figure out how do I get the information to them that they would need to.
Didn't you build the lock server and stuff this year too, right?
Yeah. So I built our string server for managing all of that and trying to make it so we can more easily provide stuff to the love team.
Which if you're interested in all that, we have had probably 5 or 6 podcast episodes where we've talked a lot about all the
we had one episode that was basically all about it, and then it's come up significally a bunch of times because it's
crazy,
a fucking lot.
It's a huge part of the development process.
Yeah. And basically every week, because I basically review all the strings as they get ready to be sent off to localization. And so every week I'm reading these strings and thinking like, how confusing is this one going to be, for the loc team, and then so it's on the top of my mind all the time. And it's a lot, but we're 2/3 of the way through. And we just submitted another batch recently, and it'll be a kind of all wrapped up pretty shortly after all the words wrapped up, which is going to be soon. So anyway, fuckloads of words. So thanks to Jen in particular for writing so many of those. It's a lot. So we've also added 3,100 new assets, because another thing we talked about a lot over the podcast this year is the Game Changer, which is our internal content management tool that lives in game and is how we add new stuff. So if we have a new creature or a new item or whatever, we use that thing,
a scene,
a quest or whatever. We use that thing to make what we call a moat, and that moat basically pieces together the data that kind of matches the thing. So we've got 3,100 new of those moat things, right? So each one of those represents some concrete kind of component. So that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. That's bad to the game. We've updated. So now the way that we store, so we got the Game Changer that stores basically like asset information, right? And then we've got the world map, which stores where everything is, where the tiles are out in the world, where the things are placed, the phases of like scene changes, like all that. So basically anything that you can see pretty much is stored there, where everything goes. So that thing has been updated 2,300 times over the year. So that's
nice.
10 times a work day, basically. So that's a lot. It's a lot of times. And then the database consisting of all of those 3,100 new assets, but also all the assets that were already there. Because we didn't just add stuff, we also changed stuff, right?
Yeah.
So collectively, there were 2,200 published updates to that collection, which could be any number of changes in each one.
Batches of changes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be
like
a
it's
little
like
tweak, could be 100 things changed, could be just one thing, whatever. But but that's basically 10 times a day for the past year. The map has been updated and the database of all of the asset data has been updated.
Is that including like workshop levels? I feel like that's insanely high. I mean, we work in batches.
I'm just looking at the version number of the world map, the campaign,
Jesus Christ,
and the version number of the game changer data, and that's it. But between now and a year.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah.
So yeah.
It kind of comes in waves.
It's waves, yeah, really heavy waves, I guess.
It's like sometimes there'll be like a day or two where there's almost no changes, and then suddenly like a bunch of us are working on shit all at once, and it's just like bam, bam, bam.
Well,
bam,
yeah,
bam,
because it's between because we got Fat Bard who's doing all of our audio stuff, and so they're making commits to it. We've got Sam and we've got Ann, the two artists doing stuff. We got Seth also doing stuff. We've got Jen doing all the quest stuff. So all those people every day have some amount of stuff that they're committing to the total set of all changes,
which is cool because actually, one of our big challenges and goals with making this game was, we talked about this, I think just even a few episodes ago, was like at the start of development, we were looking at the scope of this game and we were like, we can't make this game in the way that we've been making games. Like we need to redo everything to be scalable so we can add more people to the process. So that we can have a lot more parallel development happening with fewer dependencies and fewer people waiting on each other to do shit. And so we built all these new tools to make that happen. And hey,
look at that.
It's working.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, we're using the shit out of the tools that we have. And without really any of them, we got a lot of tools. And without any of them, the whole thing would be significantly more of a nightmare than
be a different game. Just make a different game.
Yeah. It would be a different and less game. Less,
I heard
and so on.
I heard last week that one of the monsters in Monster Hunter, which is very popular. I mean, it's a Monster Hunter game. That's the short of it. They're very complicated. They're like ecosystem.
I'm following you so far.
But one of those monsters apparently takes about a year and some change to make. And they have
which happens in parallel. It's
exactly. So they parallelize it, of course, with like a very large team. But I mean, they have dozens of these things, and it's like it's insane.
We heard about that with AAA for like levels of, because I can't remember which two we were talking to, but for one of the big AAA titles, the Sim Deal, they're talking about level design, where they would have a team of basically 5 people, each team acting in parallel to like work on a different sort of level of the game, right? And it was the same deal because that process takes like 3 to 6 months. To complete a section, right?
So you solve that problem with scale, like just have tons of teams, right? So we're kind of in this weird middle ground where like we have such a small scale that, it's still the case that like if a single quest took us 6 months to add, the game wouldn't be finished, right? Because we only have a couple of people working on it. So we still have like a little bit of parallel work happening, but it still has to be fast as fuck.
Yes.
So we got that, and then those all come together because the versioning of how things work is its own whole complicated morass, right? But we basically can independently version the data. So the world map can be incremented when we publish changes to it. All the game data can be incremented when we publish changes to it. And then the game itself, which basically bundles those things together plus all of its logic and stuff, right? Also can be versioned. And so it kind of like, it basically captures a snapshot of those other things, right? And so for that, and every time we do that, we go through an automated system that makes the builds. It makes our Windows build for Steam. It makes our Google Play build. It makes our iOS build. It makes some test builds. Does a whole bunch of stuff.
Things that actually testers, downstream customers can play. I guess you could put it that way, right? Whether it's QA or partners.
So that currently goes through QA. And so then our QA every day gets whatever version is available and they can test changes and so on. So that has happened 333 times, which is more than once a day on average, right? Once a work day. And that means because every time we do that, every time we version the game, we make a build for each of those platforms. That's at least 3 builds per version. So we're looking at, 1,000 plus builds because there's also the demo builds and all these like test things that we do and stuff. So
spin-off builds.
we're looking at well over 1,000 built versions of the game that
What I
got
love about
deployed
this-
to targets and like the whole fucking deal.
What I really love about this is that it's just thinking back at the first Crashlands when Seth would just sit there for an hour while the game built
Every
on
Friday.
his
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
per week.
And that was even
maximum.
true up until towards the end of the first year working on Levelhead.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
like each week, and like in Levelhead, we were like, we need some QA. Like we really need QA, right? And so when we were working on Levelhead, we hired some part-time QA that they would just only come in on Fridays.
Yeah.
And then like Thursday end of day was when I would go back through Git and like make a Google Doc and like type up all the patch notes of manually of what changed that week. And then the entire last half of my day on Thursday was making those builds and putting them in Dropbox or whatever for the QA team. So once a week, we would get our like 4 hours of testing.
Like I said, it's insane
things
scale
have
shit.
changed.
And actually, and if you want to, and Seth put a talk together about that for GDC in 2019, I think it was. So
2020.
or 20.
That was
Oh,
I
it
had
was
to
your
give it
digital
from
talk.
home
Yeah,
because of
Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah. So if Sampy can drop a link in the show notes to that talk to give you that way, if you want to hear the full picture, which is how we went from making a build a week at most and doing no QA to where we are now, which is we make builds, 1 or 2 builds every day, and goes to QA,
QA
every
team
day.
is like, oh God,
Yep.
you know.
Uh,
But yeah, that talk is called Stress-Free Game Development.
Yeah.
If you want to look that up on YouTube.
And so that brings us to the end of the things that are fairly easily measurable and relatively interpretable. Because things like, so sure, I said we added 700 new art assets, but how many got changed? I don't fucking know. It's too hard to measure, right? Yeah, we added 80,000 words, but how many got changed?
My
A
favorite
lot.
part about that too is that every armor set that Flux has is around I think 60 pieces, and we added the other half of them, but you wouldn't actually pick that up because it's an update to her spine file, which is basically it's another 300 drawings
Yeah.
just inside of Flux's spine file, which you wouldn't have seen, which is hilarious. So there's stuff like that where it's an undercount. You know what I mean? It's an undercount.
Well, that's the thing. This is why
Always.
it's an important takeaway of knowing, like, this is why at this point in my life, I'm like, just like, don't bother measuring almost anything. It's fucking pointless. You take away the wrong lessons, right? Because all you know is the thing you can easily measure. In this case, it's easy to look at like a number that is bigger now, right? But that brings us to lines of code, which is, I think, the good example of like how hard it is to make meaningful sense out of this, right? Because over the year, we've added 18,000 lines of code, which at first blush, when I first saw that number, I was like, that's not very many, right? If you're not familiar with this kind of thing, it seems like a lot, right? But like, I was like, oh, that's actually weirdly small. Because what I'm not capturing, because what actually matters is change. It doesn't matter what was added, right? It matters what was changed, which includes additions, subtractions, and changes, right? Now, I would bet anything that if we looked at
I've deleted a lot.
that if we looked at the additions, deletions, and changes, like for individual lines of code in the project, it's easily well over 100,000, I would bet.
Yeah.
One interesting example is so we parted ways with Netflix this year. And while we were working with them, we had their SDK integrated into the project, and we were developing our cloud saving system in accordance with the specs that they required for how their stuff worked. And that was a ton of code in the game. And then once we parted ways with them, like, all right, rip it out, right? And just delete all that code because we don't need it anymore. We added a ton of code, removed a ton of code, and then we rebuilt the cloud saving system after that to be a totally different model. But it was probably about the same amount of code, maybe even less code than the original cloud saving system we had because it was simpler.
Yeah.
Right. And so as one of my favorite sayings is like in programming, the most powerful key on your keyboard is delete, right? Because oftentimes your first solution to a problem is too complicated, it's too convoluted, and over time, as you learn more, you can simplify it and like break it down, and you end up with less code but more functional code, right?
Yeah,
So-
Well, especially
often it's more valuable to have a negative lines added count, right? Yeah.
Well, especially with the way we've been moving, which is this parallelization of the work of making the game has also largely been about not having code, right?
Not requiring code for things to progress.
Exactly. So all of those game changer commits that I was talking about, all of those game changes, adding new modes, whatever else, did not take new code, right? And
So I think
the
the
change got moved somewhere else, right?
Exactly.
So I think creatures, for example, I think probably have something like 2,500 lines of code. I would guess. But every time we add a new creature, of which we now have a lot, that adds 0 lines of code because they use the same code. Yeah. Right. It's the game changer data that gets interpreted by the code. And every now and then, so like actually I did some tweaks to creature behaviors to their pathfinding this week. And it actually added nothing. It added no lines of code. It was just some modifications here and there to stuff that was already there. And that affects every creature. And it's like a sweeping change across the whole game. So yeah, it's like it is kind of funny though when you hear about managers in larger companies measuring productivity of their programmers by how many lines of code they produce.
Yeah, okay. Doesn't work.
Doesn't work. There is no way to measure it. And so, because I've also been seeing a slew of articles from like people trying to measure the impact of like AI tools on coding, right? And positive or negative, my only takeaway every time is like, this is bullshit because you need a metric to understand like what the impact is. And the metrics are things like quality, productivity. And I'm like, how the fuck are you, if we can measure code
anytime
quality.
Somebody measures productivity, in my mind, I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
Like when people are like, oh
tricky.
yeah, for example, like the average worker's productivity has gone up by like 300%, but wages have only gone up by blah. I'm like, agreed that we should all get more money. But what the fuck is this productivity?
Is it actions per minute? Is it StarCraft? Are we just on actions per minute? You know what I mean? Like, is that what we're doing? Is it like the code? What is it? Emails sent? I don't know.
What is it? If I have meetings all week, like, is that?
And again, just like programming, it's usually more productive to have not done something.
I think we could safely say that regardless of the metrics used, it was a very productive year for us.
Well, yeah, that's the other bit. Is we're also just looking at snapshots, right? Because I was looking at a snapshot from basically December of 2023, and then a snapshot from last week, December 2024, right? And so it's not only is it because it's again changes are what we actually do. What you do is you hit a key on the keyboard to make a change, right? What you do is you move a pen and add a stroke to a page, right? It's like, that's what we actually do. But what we can measure are basically like, but most of what we do, we throw away, right? You rewrite the thing. You re-edit the art that you're making. You refactor the code that you're writing, right? So the question of, it's kind of like measuring a coastline, right? It's like, as you zoom in on the coastline and try to measure how long it is, it keeps getting longer. Every time you zoom in on it, it gets longer, right? And it's the same deal trying to understand like what the fuck actually happened. And so all we have are these snapshots, and those are already impossible to really make meaningful sense out of. But what really happened was every minute in between then and now of individual changes that are not being captured by this. So it's cool when the amount of stuff we can capture that represents a tiny fraction of the work is big, right? Because that fucking tells you, like, that's the lower limit by a lot. Yeah. It's way lower than what actually happened, right? Which is all to say, we did a fuckload, as Sam was saying. We did a fuckload over the year. It was a lot. We basically made the whole ass game in effect, right? This year. And it just makes me like, it blows my mind thinking about how, like, with a team of 9, 3 of whom are basically the content team. The rest of us are all doing support roles of various sorts, right? So the team of 3 basically make
4.
4?
Yeah, and on the
2 artists. Yeah.
2 artists. Yeah. All right, yeah. So a team of 4 basically doing all the content stuff. I always just think of like the categorically, because historically it's only been Sam doing art. So a team of 4 basically making all this content and looking at the numbers, the enormous underestimate representing that work, and the thinking of like Larian doing Baldur's Gate 3.
Oh yeah,
with 600 people and a single character.
I think they had 400. I think 400 people over 7 years.
Yeah, over 7 years, and like and to the point where they have like a single character who has a dozen hours of spoken VO dialogue. Yeah. Right, like fucking unimaginable. And like think about how hard it is to operate at our scale. Like all the tools that we've developed, all the practices that we've worked out, how hard it still is, right? And like try to imagine like operating at that scale. I'm like, I don't know. It's no wonder that every time we talk to people who work at big studios, they're just like underwater all the time. Yeah, because we also are. And,
well, I mean, the hardest part of anything is the integration problem.
Yeah.
You know, of like,
Always.
okay, I have this thing, I have this quest, the story I want to tell. I mean, Sam and I were even laughing yesterday because all throughout Crashlands 2, we've had this little thing that happens when a creature aggroes onto you and starts attacking. Is we just had these 3 little exclamation marks pop out of it, these red exclamation marks to represent like it's mad and it's coming for you, right? And as kind of our end of development sort of polishing and stuff, we're just kind of looking at everything like what can we kind of shore up to just like make it better, right? And that just kind of popped up yesterday, and Sam was like, I could make a new like a sprite of like a cool looking.
It's always irritated me as an art person because it's kind of just a flat looking. It's just 3 exclamation points.
It's just text. But also that means like if we change the font over to like a CJK font, then those exclamation marks become like much further apart and thinner, which doesn't look as good.
Weird,
and so like let's get a sprite on that thing. And baseline, as a game programmer, somebody's like, hey, can you like make it so that a visual of an exclamation mark flies out of this creature? It's like, yeah, that's like take me 5 minutes, no problem. But then the question is, okay, well, like we already have a system of other text flying out of creatures of like the numbers when you deal damage to them and stuff. And that thing's actually kind of complicated because those numbers kind of like add together and they try not to overlap, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So that first is like, okay, should this exclamation mark respect those same rules or is it like a different thing?
Yep.
And then also, what about things like the health bars over their heads and other stuff? Like, where should this thing pop
Here's
out?
your
so that
fractal shoreline of questions that you got to answer.
And so like the thing on its own is real simple, but then when you go to plug it in, then you got a bunch of questions to answer. Now we have the advantage of there's very few people to ask to get the answers to those questions.
That's why it goes
we
fast,
can just kind of quickly do it. And I can't imagine like somebody being like, yeah, we should swap this out for the exclamation mark. And they're like, all right, well, we'll put that on we'll put that on the board. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have a meeting and see how we're going to call in all the engineers involved. And we're going to see how we can get that exclamation mark.
You see why a lot of those like quality of life things just go out the window at larger scale. Cause it is hard. It's very hard to like somehow.
We talked about like the field of view slider and Starfield and shit like that, right? Whereas like there are reasons why all those things just don't go in. And it's because
everything goes harder than you think.
Once you scale up, it gets hard to do just about anything.
So I'm very proud of how we've managed to scale up, and because of the care we've taken with it, it has just gotten easier and easier to do stuff in Crashlands, like within Crashlands 2 itself, developmentally, which has just been rad, which is cool shit. Adding all the stuff.
A lot of the problems that we've had on the sort of like the game side, a lot of it actually just has had to do with optimization of the dev tools.
Correct.
Yeah. Just because of, if we have.
The world's so fucking big, there's so many things in it doing so many things.
If we have thousands and thousands of things, like how do we speed up load times and stuff so that like we're not sitting there waiting.
Yep.
In our case, like we have a low tolerance for load times. So if it's like, I'm waiting 10 seconds for this thing, it's like, can we get that down to 6 or 5, And I know like a lot of people who use like Unreal Engine or Unity are probably hearing that like 10 seconds. Oh, please give me 10-second load times, But we're big believers in the problem of like, if you have a load time almost at all, that's an opportunity for you to accidentally derail yourself.
Yep.
Right. Because like as soon as you find yourself alt tabbing to be like, all right, well, this is going to be a bit. So I'm going to alt tab and go like check an email or something.
You're going to overshoot.
Well, you're not. Yeah, you overshoot and now you're in the middle of something else and it creates this big task switching waste.
And even if
problem,
you don't, it does change your behavior because I feel like when I'm working in my web stuff, like I said, I'm working on my new web stuff, like with Blork, which we talked about in the past, like the string server stuff, right? All new things, all relatively small scale. The tooling around that means I can make a change in the code and instantly see it in the browser.
Yep, beautiful.
Right? So I just make changes as I go. I don't take into account viewing it, like seeing the consequence of the change as like part of how I work on the project. When I switch over to
so you can get into a flow state when you're working.
Yeah, just working on stuff, seeing what happens, whatever. When I switch back to like Rumpus, the project that powers all of our web stuff, right, which is old and huge, and I've not been able to upgrade it to all the newest ways of doing things, so it's just too big and hard to do that with, right? Or when I go try to like do some stuff in GameMaker in the Crashlands 2 code base. In both cases, it's just, even though like the wait times aren't horrible, it's noticeable. It's something I have to pay attention to, which means that the way I work is completely different. It's basically like I try to figure out what are the set of things I can change at once.
Yeah, you do bigger batches, basically.
You do bigger batches, which was now increasing the likelihood that debugging is harder.
Wrong, and then it's harder.
Yeah, so it's been really important this whole time for us to keep all those times down, and the times are like we all feel the times being too long because they will always be too long, right? Yeah. They just always are too long, right? But we've done a decent job of like staying on top of it so they don't get too out of hand. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
So we did all of this with also 2 human people being added to the world across our team.
We've actually had 4 children added
in the past 2 years.
Yeah.
So prior to Crashlands 2, 0 children within the studio. It's like nobody in the studio had kids.
Yeah.
And then over the course of Crashlands 2, 4 kids were born.
Sudden explosion of babies.
It was time.
And I mean, one thing I'm proud of there is like, we got like Jordan got to take full parental leave during his time. Right, so you got 2 months. Dope. Because like, and that might sound, I guess, for our European listeners, maybe like, what? 2 months? But this is America, and we have no government assistance with anything. So all of that is just that's just us. That's just us doing that. So
just doing what we can, trying to help.
Yeah, and I got to take 2 weeks, which like not a lot, but still something. More than a lot of people get, which is insane.
Yeah, and you sort of begged all of your parental leave for.
My plan is post launch to take it in nice chunks.
Spend some more time with the kiddos.
It is. I think it's kind of an interesting topic too. Right? It's talking about if you're a small team like ours, and if you're in like a role like Sam's role, where the project basically comes to a halt at some point if Sam's gone for too long, right? And so when it comes to something like parental leave, it's like we want to be able to say like, oh yeah, go take your 2 months, 3 months, whatever, parental leave.
But it has a different cost at that point.
Yeah, but the cost on the company is that if Sam's gone for like a week is fine, 2 weeks starts to like chafe a little bit, but everybody can still make stuff work. The amount of rework that will have to happen, the longer Sam is gone, goes up really fast because if he's not around to help with decisions, that kind of stuff, by the time he gets back, we're like, oh shit, we shouldn't have gone down some path or whatever, right? So once we get to 3 weeks, it's like, okay, again, we can manage it, but it's like now starting to become a problem.
A little long.
4 weeks, now like probably some bad stuff has happened. We get all the way out to like 2 months. It's like, oh shit, we've derailed something badly,
Well, and so, what you basically got to do in that scenario is plan ahead and like reorient what's going to happen in that time, right? So if it was like, okay, we have like a bunch of tech stuff that we just want to solve that doesn't require much in the way of like art or game design, like the collaborative stuff that Sam's involved in. Yeah. So, it's like it would be doable, but it would, we'd have to like shuffle things around. But it's not really doable now.
Yeah, that's the timing is huge for all this stuff, right? And I think that's I'm really happy we're able to give that at least to like, the people on the team, like our people, even if depending on the timing, it doesn't necessarily work out like to be so chunky for, me or whatever else. Because I know, but the plan is next year to take off, basically to take the total amount of time and just sort of break it up over the year in more manageable chunks, which I'm very excited about because these babies they're more interesting now, frankly.
Yeah.
So it's enjoyable.
That's true. Yeah. Taking the parental leave in like the first 2 months, it's like baby's just sitting there.
Baby's just sitting there, but it's exhausting. It's kind of like what it is. It's like just battling that. And then afterwards, you've got a lot of just hanging out to do, a lot of care and hanging out to the bears. So, it's
I'll say my own personal life achievement this year is I lifted 3.7 million pounds this year.
That's a lot.
Which is pretty backloaded, actually, because at the start of this year, I would go to the gym and I would do one set and then feel like I was going to throw up and then go home. So it's been a good journey for me to become much stronger and healthier, and I've lifted several blue whales.
Didn't you get most of those blue whales lifted in the last like 4 months?
Yeah. I started to be able to get into like a much better routine, actually, like over our summer break in July, where I really kind of sat down and kind of like planned out what I was going to do. Because I think the trap that I've always fallen into in the past is thinking of things in like a temporary way, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to do a 6-week program. I'm going to do a 10-week program. And I kind of pivoted my thinking on it. It's like, no, I just need to like change how I'm living my life so that I make space for this, right? Just always, and make it flexible so that it's not really like if I miss a couple of days, I can't get derailed. Like that's the goal, because that's always happened to me in the past, you know. And so I've managed to keep it up for like 6 months, just getting in there and doing stuff.
It's huge. Yeah.
So it's huge, and soon so will I be. You know,
Already. Well, then because this last like the hard stats, right? Did you get?
Yep, that's the end of the hard. And there's a bunch of stuff about like the other games and stuff, but I think actually I'll hit a few Levelhead items because it's kind of fun, and Levelhead doesn't get talked about that much, you know. So we also have our first time in games done quick.
Yeah.
So huge thanks to the community, and then Illegally Sam in particular who did the run. We've all, like, back when we launched Levelhead, we were like, this is a game for speedrunners. Like we were trying so hard to get anybody to pay attention, to give a shit, and like put it in those things, and just nobody did. So kudos to the community for every year they resubmit, they keep on doing it. And so this year,
and it's great to watch too. Even if you don't know exactly what's going on, like the commentary is great. You did a fantastic job, and the video is on YouTube, so you can look up Levelhead, GDQ, or Illegally Sam, you'll find it.
Yeah, and
it's really
Sam, we could pop a link into the show notes also. And it's also fun because so Illegally Sam completed it in 46 minutes, which isn't even the record, right? It's very fast.
For the campaign, right?
For the campaign, yeah. And which is particularly funny because like I still haven't completed the last, like, I don't know, 10 levels or something of the game. And here this person is just fucking killing the thing.
He's chatting the whole time. I'm on the performative aspect. I don't understand how you do that. That's talking.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the real record is, but it's probably closer to 30 minutes, I would bet, because when people aren't like trying to talk and do other things at the same time. So, but it is very fun to watch the techniques and stuff that the community has put together for that. So that's super fun. So even though there aren't that many players of Levelhead, it's still like the stuff adds up. Like we're talking about, like everything just adds up, right? So, so for the past year, we've had 13,000 new levels added.
Jesus.
So, and because of and we designed Levelhead intentionally this way to make it so that it's not dependent on how many people are playing right now, right? Because we knew for any game, no matter, even if it was really popular when it first launched, it would eventually not be, you know? And so the logic was, well, if somebody makes a level, like, who cares if they made it 3 years ago? You know, if you haven't played it yet, that's a new level to you. So you should be able to.
So there's like 40 new levels a day, give or take.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Something like that.
And and it's hard to know if those are published levels, and it's hard to know if those are good, right? But
well, most aren't, because that's just the rule of things.
Most aren't, but we have another metric to get a sense of like how many of those are good, which is, did somebody bother to get them published into the tower? You know, play other people's levels, put the points in, get it graduated out of the marketing department. And so of those 13,000 new levels, 2,000 got added to the marketing department. So if you wanted to play a game that had fuckloads of content, then even Levelhead, which doesn't have that many players, added 2,000 levels.
Yeah, I did see, I think it was in the Levelhead subreddit, which I lurk in, you know. Somebody had popped in basically being like, hey, I want to play this game. Like, I wanted to play when it came out, but I never got around to it. And now I'm worried that the player base is too small, you know, because I think they were looking at like Steam concurrent players or something like that.
Yeah, probably. Yep.
So I jumped in. I was like, well, here's the thing. Like, it's not a synchronous multiplayer game. Like the amount of stuff in this game just only grows over time. There's just always more stuff to do. But also it's not only on Steam. You know, it's like 7 different platforms.
Yeah, there are enough people. There's enough people every day playing the game that is still, because of how we designed that flexibility system with the marketing department and everything, there's enough bandwidth, weirdly enough, for you to publish.
Yeah, it's designed to work at pretty dang small scales, and it turned out it works, which is pretty dope. So,
and weirdly, like the longer you wait to play it, the more stuff, like the better it is. The more stuff it is to do.
Yeah, it's basically as long as there are a few dozen people, not even like at a time playing, but just like actively playing the game and playing community levels and stuff. That's all it takes to keep the game.
That's all it needs. It was by design.
That's a crazy good system.
It's pretty dope. So I love to see that it works, because also that means that, you know, Levelhead can still have its day someday. We're all hoping, you know, because it's
just waiting.
It's
waiting in the wings.
But the individual players, there's kind of fun stats for. So it's been a while since I actually like looked at the stats to see what the community was up to. I just know that the active community members we have been around now, for a while. So, so FlowArt now has the lead for the most for the levels that have accumulated the most playtime. So of levels he's made, right, which could add up to 250 days
of human time.
Has
I'm
gone
real. That is way more than
levels.
most game devs, most indie game devs manage.
Yeah.
Like published. That's insane. That's great.
Yeah, because literally meaning if you were to sit down like and play, this is 250 days of straight hours, right? So break that into, so take that times 3 to give you a work day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking at 2+ years of play time.
100 days is
somebody just putting
24
all their time into it, right?
It's 2,400 hours, 4,800. Yeah, so it's going to be something like 6,000 something hours.
Yeah, a lot
of playtime.
So that's fucking cool, and that's that's the top. There's also like all this stuff is on a power curve. Just like I think it is kind of fun to look at like Levelhead Stats because they work the same way as the games industry at large, right? Yep. Where you've got a few at the very top. There's a power curve. It rapidly falls down, and then there's like a long tail, and you can see that it's the same
and
pattern.
The people who publish a lot of levels and therefore end up with a lot of followers, like as they publish their next levels, those levels immediately get more play, and it kind of creates this feedback loop, right? Just like in games,
where like same.
Successful studios, they've already got people playing their existing stuff, and then they have a built-in player base.
What's the nice thing about the marketing department system is that allows people to break out of it. So because we're in the games industry, we know how fucking hard it is, and so we were like, how do we make sure that it's not just a winner-take-all system?
I would say the marketing department is what it used to feel like in the indie space in like the early 2010s with like how YouTube worked, right?
It's also how Steam worked at the beginning because
Steam Greenlight.
Well, not Steam Greenlight, but like Steam, when you would publish a game on Steam, they would guarantee 500,000 views.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
Where they would put your game in front of 500,000 people to collect the stats to decide what to do next, right?
Yeah, I heard now that basically what they do is like a most recent thing from a conversation I saw with Chris Zakowski and some YouTubers that they use the discovery queue now when you publish to kind of do the same thing. It's like they put the game in there and then basically see how well it.
But they don't put everything in there. I don't think.
I think they do. I don't know. Well, maybe they do. Everything. Well,
yeah, I think because there used to be.
I don't really see garbage stuff in there to be honest.
Exactly.
Because I get the mostly popular things.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and that's because, and it has to be because otherwise people would stop using the discovery queue, right? Because if all they saw was the bulk, because most games are a person's first game. It's like what's on Steam these days, right? Which isn't to say that they're bad necessarily, but they're gonna be rough around the edges,
But they
like
probably are. Let's be real.
They probably are.
Because most things.
And that's the thing is like is once you don't have the initial step of pre-filtering games for quality, at least by some metric, right? Then the bulk of games become things that any one person doesn't want. And so if what people are shown is a discovery queue that's just statistical, it's just the games, then they're going to stop using that system because all they're seeing is stuff they don't want, right? So we're well beyond the time where like Steam would guarantee that if your game got on Steam, which was hard, then it would get shown to people and that would happen, right? But with the marketing department, we tried to, solve these problems at Levelhead.
Yeah, keep the spirit alive. Well, I want to say too that Crashlands had that Floydson 100 Days video where he basically played the whole thing, which is so fun. If you could look up like I played 100 Days of Crashlands, I think it was about 100% Crashlands. The YouTube channel is Floydson, and it's fantastic. All of his series are basically just he essentially either 100% or plays a kind of more like a larger scale open worldy kind of games for 100 in-game days.
Yeah, so he did 100% Crashlands.
Yeah, he did 100%.
And they compressed the video down.
Watch a man slowly go insane.
Yeah,
that was what was so fun. It's like
spends way too much time in a game.
Yeah, it's like 2 hours, but it's like moving. It's just the whole thing. But his commentary is also hilarious because it's like I mean, all of our games are they're with the sci-fi kind of goofball shit. So he's trying, he's reading stuff and like talking about who in what city in this like insane Brubus town needs this thing done to some other person, and he's just sort of losing his shit because the names of everything are just bonkers and things. And so it's a very good time if you want like a recap of the experience of playing Crashlands without playing it. If you don't have like 70 hours to dunk. before Crashlands 2 comes out. It's a pretty good time.
I mean, it's a 2.5 hour highlight reel, you know.
It really is, yeah.
It's I found it. I watched the whole thing. It was because I've also forgotten so much about the original game, and
It's just a useful video for us, to be honest.
it's
Just
very useful
from an archive standpoint.
Yeah, so I also reached out to Flights and I was like, "Hey, thanks. By the way, you probably didn't think about it in these terms, but this is also an extremely useful dev resource for us because when we're like, what the fuck was going on in the original Crashlands, we could just be like, oh, let's just like skim this video.
Just scrub through Floyd's video and find it.
Yeah, this is pretty dope. And then for the Levelhead players, because some of these numbers are just staggering. So player Cire, C-I-R-E, takes the record for the most published levels, period, with 884, which is a lot of published levels.
Damn. So it's probably like 7% of the levels that were published last year. Oh, that's probably over the past, 4 years.
Yeah, that's total. Because total levels, there's a lot. I can't remember what it is, but there's a lot. It's over 200,000. But Sire also has the most levels graduated to the tower, period, but also this past year. In the past year alone, they've gotten 229 levels into the tower.
Like what a day.
Damn.
Which, if you're doing all the math, is more than 10% of the levels that made it to the tower this year, right? From one person. Again, this is the power curve shit, right?
Yep. Incredible.
And then one that is, and then we've got a stat that's so unbelievable, the community seems to think it's real. So I kept it, which is player Lamak Fangiant has the most ribbons, which ribbons are for
Top score.
top score on a level.
Different than time.
With 18,000. 18,000.
There's definitely a strat for that, which is going to be like going and finding levels with that like and maybe have like a low spice score, like basically trying to find levels that the game is unlikely to surface.
So, it's clearly there's a system in place for that, right? And but even then, a fuckload of work.
Well, the funny thing is, like, I think we may have it. I don't think we have achievements related to ribbons. I don't think so. Just because we were like, we don't want people to.
We might have like a
be
low,
incentivized to.
I think we might have like
whatever.
a low one, but not.
Yeah,
not
I think
like
we have some lowish ones.
Yeah, but like, there's nothing that you get for getting that many ribbons.
This
person's
personal
just doing it
satisfaction.
for the love of the game.
Yeah. Well, that's like, so that's 18,000. The second place player has 6,900, which is still a fuckload.
That's a lot.
A fuckload.
Yeah.
But is a third,
This reminds me of how like when it was revealed that like 1/3 of Wikipedia was written by one guy.
Oh
yeah. That's just
the case all this stuff.
Yeah, because
we owe that guy a debt.
Yep.
Yeah, because Sire, who has the most levels published, also is in second place for Shoes, which is the speed score, with 8,600, right? Which also makes sense because if they're publishing that many levels of the tower, that means they have to be playing a lot of levels to accumulate all of the
department points,
marketing bucks, right? But they're not just doing that; they're also winning a lot, right? Which is pretty dope. And then finally, player Juicebox, which is a trademark infringement, but whatever, we'll let it slide, has the lead in Shoes speed scores with 9,600, which again,
it's great.
And like this is the kind of fun thing about Levelhead is even though we're perennially kind of bummed that the game didn't take off the way that we thought it would and should, and I was updating some stats also on our website and stuff, and I checked our review score on Steam. It's still at overwhelmingly positive. It's at 97% positive on Steam.
The thing is, for the people who got into it, they went real hard into it.
And it's just it's that simultaneous perennial bummer that the game didn't get as big as it should have, but also seeing the thriving small community who's just doing cool shit. They're so into it, and you start to see these guys because like some of these players have been playing for years. Just years. And so they get to accumulate these kinds of wild numbers.
I mean, that was the goal with that game. Like we wanted to make a hobby game, as in like a game that you can play for years and there's always something new and fun and interesting to do, and
we did.
We did it.
Yeah.
So like you're saying, sometimes it's just about like confidence and discovery, where like it's possible that if Crashlands 2 takes off and people start looking back through the catalog and they're like, what else has this company made? And you see our most recent title other than that is Levelhead. Like Levelhead numbers can go up still. You never know. Actually, I think original Crashlands had its biggest sales
moved the most units this year.
By far sold the more units this year than and we did.
Yeah.
So we have got Crashlands 2.
Discount.
Yeah,
But,
a very steep. So we did our steepest discounts ever this year for original Crashlands, and we have the hype from Crashlands 2 that are driving sales. And so collectively this year, I didn't actually tally it up to like look at past years, but without a doubt, this is our biggest year for Crashlands 2 sales.
Crashlands.
For Crashlands sales since the launch year.
Yeah.
Definitely. And collectively, it's like
in terms of sheer unit volume.
sheer units moved. Yeah. And if you were to add up the past several years, I didn't go back to see how many, but if you were to add up the past several years of units moved for original Crashlands, it would still be less than this year. So we've got so many players of Crashlands this year, which is fucking cool. But that was part of our strategy too this year, was to say the more players we get playing Crashlands, and if we have a mechanism to let them know that Crashlands 2 is out or coming out, then we get to basically use it as an advertising platform for Crashlands 2. And we did have seen, because we have in original Crashlands on Steam, we have a pop-up, or we have a message somewhere that tells you like, oh, hey, Crashlands 2 is coming out.
Menu.
On the main menu. So like tap this to wishlist it, right? That kind of stuff. So we have that system. And back when we were collecting stats on that, because we're now using a new mechanism that's better for players, but we can't track in any way. So back when we had a worse but trackable mechanism, it was the biggest driver of wish lists into Crashlands 2. And so we were like, okay, let's just triple down on this, sell the game for nothing, and just get people in there and get people into Crashlands 2.
It worked.
It worked. So yeah,
It boosted those wish lists by quite a lot.
Yeah. So I think, in the scheme of things, then as far as what all these numbers mean for us, because I think that's always like, again, the details are.
What does it mean?
Yeah, the details are interesting little focal points, but when you zoom back out, knowing them, then you kind of got to get the context. And I think for us, it's like starting this year, we did not have any of the rest of Crashlands 2 beyond the first zone. And even that still had some stuff left to basically
a lot of missing pieces.
Yeah. So this whole last year, Seth is currently actively building out the final, basically the finale kind of boss area. So we're at the end. Just about all the side content is actually complete. Also, we basically did that ahead of time this time. So the bones of it it's basically, the bones of it it's all done.
The bones, the guts,
the bones, the guts. There's a few. We got to pop the eyeballs in. You know what I mean?
There's some open wounds here and there. But
so some things up. But it's the Frankenstein monsters. It's getting in there. And so starting this year, we didn't have the vast majority of the game. You know what I mean? Literally the other 2/3 of it. And then over this year, that's what we've managed to do. And then on top of that, didn't have localization going yet, nor the full systems ready for that. Which now, again, it's mostly localized. We didn't I guess from a control standpoint, from a UX standpoint, there are still just a lot of things that we had left.
Yeah, fully rebuilt controller support.
Undone, yeah. So controllers work in menus now in all sorts of ways, a whole bunch of overhauls to that stuff. The reality as far as what this looks like for us coming into then the launch of the game and into next year is, I think, I'm very excited because we haven't announced the launch date yet, but we chose it in a way that I think allows us to finish getting the game fully tightened down.
I guess that is an announcement in of itself, is that we do have a launch date.
We actually know it now. Yeah.
Yeah. It is
previously
set.
we haven't quite known it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, all that stuff it all starts unrolling in 2025. And so it's kind of nice to be at that end point. And it's just, I don't know, it'll be almost, I don't know, how long has it been since Levelhead came out? April 2020.
Yeah. April 2020 was when we launched Levelhead.
It's been, it's
Which
already
was
been
a month into the pandemic, so it was a chaotic time.
And we really started on Crashlands 2 stuff fully around October, November, something like that, with some initial multiplayer experiments and stuff like that. So you're looking at
we just passed the 4 years of development of Crashlands 2.
Yeah. So it's been a long road. This last year has been one of those things where I feel that we talk about, we're would you rather walk across the planet or take half the time building a jet and then just fly across? And that's sort of what this has felt like, And the thing is, it's one thing in theory to say it at the beginning of a project, right? I think we could do it this way and it'll work. But it's a whole other one to be now kind of finally at the end of it.
Oh, it's a big gamble, right? Because we're trying to predict what it would be
gamble.
like to have the systems and the tools and all that kind of stuff to do. So we're trying to predict the shape of the work and the shape of the work as it could be and what it would look like to get us there and our ability to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to commit to that. And then it has to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a big gamble. And the fact that we get to just feel it paying off so intensely, where it's just like, yeah, shit is just moving.
Yeah.
Is rad as hell.
Yeah. So I'm very hopeful, I guess, going into next year that this will be that Crashlands 2 will be a big success for us, as a studio. Because I think from a development standpoint, it's been a success, right? We always talk about.
We've learned a lot. We've changed a lot.
Yes.
We've got tons of great new tools going forward. It's been kind of funny too. Like every now and then we've had these conversations. We're like, how do we make it so that the next game is just like easy to make? Because this has been hard. Like it's
Really
been hard
hard.
it's been hard to like
brutally
think
hard.
of how to solve all these problems. But then those conversations always kind of wrap back around to like, that's just kind of how we do it. Like we're not going to be satisfied doing something mundane. Like we're always going to come up with something. We're like, I wonder if we can do this,
Yeah.
right? Because I think if something is easy, it's boring and it's just not really worth doing because you're not challenging yourself to try to push the envelope in some new way. It's like the big challenge with this was just scale. Like how do we make something this complex, this big? How do we scale up the team? How do we develop the tools for that? With the next game, it may not be a challenge of scale, but we'll throw some.
I'm sure
some
it'll be hard
wrenches
for
into
some
our own
stupid
shit.
reason. Yeah.
Yeah,
That we
whatever
picked.
it is.
Yeah, well, I think it'll, because scale is still its own kind of, because now that we have all the tools and stuff, right? And then it becomes a grind, right? Because now
It's just a grind. Yeah.
Because now the limitation is just how fast can you make art? How fast can you write words? How fast can you code? How fast can you whatever? Right? It all becomes that because the other stuff is just not the bottleneck anymore. So the work is where it's supposed to be, but there's still so fucking much of it that now what's happening is you end up kind of doing one kind of thing instead of
Yeah.
being constantly bouncing between stuck things,
I wouldn't mind a slightly smaller scale thing for the next whatever that means.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this in one of the last episodes too, of like what's the next game, and like for me it's like something smaller, whatever
Something
that
we
means.
can make in how about a year?
Maybe 2
Yeah,
years,
about a year and a
tops.
half.
Something we can take the tools that we have more or less, because like you said, we're gonna fuck around, but like take the tools we have more or less.
How about a roguelike? Something a little more chill.
Reusable content to the max, kind of a deal, something.
I will say one of the lessons for me from this year is there's a lot of things that are true on paper, but then in practice they fucking suck. Which I think, like, for example, like kind of what you're talking about, Sam, of like doing the same thing over and over again, right? It's like it's more efficient. So like in Sam's case, he's been animating and he's been animating creatures. He's been animating creatures since October.
The whole time.
And the thing is, it sucked at first because it had been so long since he animated a creature that he had to do a bunch of archaeological digging to figure out how they come together. And that was kind of miserable, right? And like, so the first one took much longer than any of the others. Yep. And there's an economies of scale that comes from just doing it over and over, just back to back, just creature, then creature, and another creature.
And
another
fluency development, right?
Yeah, you get a lot of momentum basically, right?
Yeah. So like on a per asset basis, it's in theory more efficient, but you're a person
That's the problem,
with hopes and dreams and feelings, And oh my fucking God, does it suck to do the same thing and nothing else for 2 months at a time.
Again,
no variation.
Even if you enjoy like at a base the thing, you know what I mean? It's like coming up with whatever the weird monster does. It's fun. It is fun. But that thing is like, that's actually the first 3 hours of work. And then the other 50 is just draw shit. You know what I mean? For like,
yeah. And of course, like, I'm like, Jen and I are over here like working on the story and stuff like that. And Sam's like, because these creatures are complex. They take a lot of work to put together and they have a lot of integrated parts and all that stuff. Big cognitive load. And so we're trying to minimize the amount of interruptions that we put onto Sam, because anything we do will like slow him down and then he's stuck in hell for even longer, and it's kind of made me like rethink a little bit going forward of like the benefits of batching. And so instead of like batching in that way, of doing like staggered batches or something.
Do a few at a time, but not all.
Yeah, do like a couple at a time and then let it rest and move on to something else so that you can like enjoy life, get some variety, see things from a different perspective, get some distance from the problems that you were working on.
And the thing is, most of
try to optimize
on Crashlands
for that,
has been that,
you know?
right? Because like, but I think when you get towards the end and also towards like marketing questions, always, hey, we need to be able to make a video. It's like, oh, I guess all the shit needs to move now. So hang on. You know, like,
but I think we kind of got here because we were like batching some other things as well, so that like this batch of things just sat for a really long time until it had to be done all at once, you know. And so something I want to try to think about going forward is like trying to not have any one person stick to one specific like thing, like type of thing for too long, because I think like you need to be able to see things differently and do a different thing every now and then.
I think it's also just, I think it's the end. Yeah. The end of dev is just,
I think no matter what,
it's just this. It's just
it's always because it's so because I'm dealing with the opposite problem, which is I don't get to do one thing for any period of time.
So I'm saying there's a middle ground, right? Of like,
but
if you're doing a new thing every 5 minutes, it's miserable.
Yeah.
If you're doing one thing for 5 months, it can also be pretty.
Yeah, but the reason it's basically tolerable though is because I know it's like, oh, we're in the end of dev. This is
same.
It's a temporary state.
It's a temporary state. We're going to get this game out. And I got to spend the last 5 years almost, working most of the time basically the way that is best for me, right? With spikes here and there. But each time I was like, I understand why there's a spike of not being able to do things the way I want. And I know it's temporary, so it's fine, right? And like at the end of dev, the temporary is longer, it's some months.
It is months.
Yeah, rather than maybe like a week or two or whatever.
But you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. You're like, this is in service of this thing that has a very specific date. Yep. And even then, like most of this stuff will be resolved long before that date,
Yeah.
I hear you there. I think part of it too is just, it's also just a personal thing. I think the reality is like for the last 12 years or whatever working together, I didn't really want to be doing the art for the first 5 years sort of quietly. And was kind of resistant to the fact that was what I was doing. You know what I mean? And then got very
someday I'm going to bust out of here.
Yeah. And then got very into it. But also the thing is like that it all kind of worked because of the shape of things, where it's like we had such integration challenges because everything had to go through Seth that like it didn't make sense. I could overwhelm you in like a couple of days and then I had to go do something else because it didn't make sense to
like you made the campaign in the first Crashlands and then you and Adam collaborated on all the like revisions of it. And
so like, there's I do enjoy doing like that, a varied chunk of things. And I think it's true that like too many of the same thing back to back has always been for like as a personal weakness of mine. Some people are like, our artist Anne, like she just crushes through art stuff.
There is this ADHD thing.
Yeah, I was going to say ADHD has the ICNU, right? Like it has to be interesting, challenging, novel, or urgent. And like right now we're kind of just in the urgent camp. Exactly. Yeah. We're like, okay, we know what we're doing. It's not hard anymore because we've answered all the questions.
Parts of it are interesting, but not the long part, which is kind of what I was getting in with the animation stuff. Which is like, I love the first couple hours of each getting into it, where I'm figuring out exactly what they're going to do and like getting those gray box animations done. Super fun. The next 40, just kind of pounding
a little fiddly bit.
Fiddly bit for 40 hours, So yeah, I agree with you on the premise. I think it's
it's hard to pull off, but
I think we did a pretty good job of trying to shape the work around, or basically shape what the studio is doing around like what is best for the people doing it.
How people are feeling.
Yeah, but
if you're not feeling good and you're doing creative work, it's not.
Yeah, but the challenge is that, it's the whole like, that's true, but also we live in a society, so like
gotta get your shit done.
We got deadlines.
We gotta get it. We're all dependent on each other to get our shit done, and
facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah, we don't. We don't get to decide like how much money we've got in the bank. We don't get to decide when is a good time to launch the game. All this. There's all these external constraints that force us to have to find those balances. And sometimes, like right now, it's just like we're leading up to launch, so we're kind of everything is a constraint now for how we do the work. it's just what it is, you know. But
You can kind of find a certain pleasure or joy in like the challenge of trying to figure out how to squeeze things in to hit the deadlines, you know, and like how to
for sure.
optimize that stuff.
I mean,
It can be pretty fun.
After I did that first creature, it took a little longer than I anticipated. Then I had this like mild panic about how to get the rest of it done, and then just spent like an afternoon doing a bunch of math, you know, trying to figure out like, okay, how can I fit what feels like way too long, like 13 weeks of time into like 9, you know, what would I need to do? And I was like, oh, I can do that, you know, and not by killing myself on the
and came up with some pretty cool ways of like creating animations in ways that they could be used in multiple ways without like too much rework and things like that, you know. Kind of like we did with the armor sets, right? Like Flux's animations. People are going to bust out the texture page for Flux, and you're going to see
That's a lot.
like the way that Flux moves is so fucking weird because we've got like we got a handful of different like poses of each limb and stuff like that get like cobbled together Frankenstein style to make all these different poses. So that we can have armor sets. Like the way we had to do it was because of that, you know.
And you'll
There's
see
all these
it
little tricks.
if you're like, for example, trying to get a fucking screenshot. And you're like, and every time you get a still, you're like, what the fuck is happening? And like, and you'll see this with, because it's also the animation style of the smear frames and stuff, right? It's just how it all works. But with like Flux in particular, because so much is going on, if you're just trying to capture a moment, like when it's all running and happening in real time, looks fucking awesome. When you try to capture a screenshot, does not.
Monstrous.
Every now and then things are just kind of a squishy, smearing, stretchy blob.
Yeah.
But hey, it's okay. You do what you got to do.
I think big lesson from last year for me, a lot of it came from trying to, basically the time we spent the first half of the year trying to complete the husk, which is the second zone. And it was just one of those reminders where it's like, okay, we thought we knew how to do this in terms of putting the whole zone together because we just finished the first one. But the reality was like the context in which we finished that whole first zone was so different, so mutated compared to the context that we were going to produce the second zone in, which was like, we had all the tools now, all of a sudden. We had the whole team there all of a sudden. It was actually such a different structure that I think it kind of reminded me like, okay.
We made a lot of assumptions that it was just going to be the same. And then we kind of just siloed off and
it
just started grinding away.
And again, like to some degree, to the whole like needing to just kind of bang stuff out, there's a certain fact of like responsibility there where it's like, yeah, we needed like 15 fucking terrain tiles and all the associated doodads with them. So it's like, that's just a certain amount of work. Got to bang it out, whatever. Right. So there is that truth of like, there's a value in just kind of being like, give me a minute. I need to go knock out these things so we have the foundational pieces. But I think likewise, there's and this happens with every game and every design. It's like every time it looks similar enough to something we've done before where you think, oh yeah,
easy peasy.
It should be like this. But again, as you meet reality with it and all of the ways it is different show up, the reality of like any one of those can cause it to actually experientially for you building it, for you experiencing whatever, to be like a totally different experience, way harder than you thought. It's sort of like with all this with the pandemic shit. It was like you change one protein, okay, on the one protein mutation on the edge of this fucking virus, and now it can like jump between people super easily, right? It's sort of like that.
Pretty
feeling.
much the same.
Yeah,
but
exactly. Pretty much the same, but the difference matters.
Different enough that it matters a lot.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of what the takeaway like I want to going forward is just be a little more upfront about like, okay, here's the ways we think they're this is the same. But importantly, let's not just look at those when we're planning out like how to do something, but what are the ways in which this context is actually very different, and make sure we kind of enumerate those a little bit more ahead of time on some of these things when we're doing like a second round.
Trying to find those upcoming speed bumps or question marks. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yep. So it's been a year. Got a lot done.
Wild.
More to come. So like Sam was saying, like Adam was saying, we've got our launch date. We know it. Soon you will know it. Mm-hmm. Not just yet, but soon.
I was actually thinking about this. I was trying to figure out like, because we know when we're going to announce the launch date. We know when the launch date is, and I was like, should we announce
the announcement
date?
Is that we're cool enough to do that? Yeah, you know, that's like a Crashlands 3 thing.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So we'll just say it's coming.
I already announced it. Soon. It's the announcement is coming soon. So that's all the time we have for this week. Our next episode will be the 500th episode.
Yeah.
And it will be coming out on January 1st.
Wow.
2025, which is pretty cool. So we'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you could just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost it up the charts, and we'd appreciate it. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you next year.
Goodbye.
Bye.